Morning, everyone. We're just going to give it a little bit more time here, about a minute or so before we get this started, just to help everyone trickle in. Okay, we're just going to give it another minute, and then we'll get started for the day here. Okay, seems like we can get going here now. It's 3 after 1. Whoever is joining us afterwards, they can just trickle into our presentation here. So I just want to welcome everyone. Good afternoon. Welcome to our first municipal member Q&A webinar session for 2023. Last year, we hosted a similar monthly Q&A session with municipal members. So if you were part of those sessions last year, welcome back. And for those joining us for the first time this year, this is an informal webinar session where I'll be providing a quick deal introductory presentation, and then we'll open up the floor for everyone for a Q&A session. So at that time, all attendees will be unmuted. So just feel free to share your questions, thoughts, concerns, and experiences with the new legal dedicated locator model. And as for just a quick house rule during that time, that since we're unmuting everyone for the Q&A session part, just mute yourself back up if you're not speaking at that time, so it gives the opportunity for other people to clearly hear their questions and whatnot. So our goal in this session is to spark communication between municipal members and ourselves regarding the new DL model, as we continue to transition the industry-wide. So in today's introductory session, I'm going to take you through the new legal concept of dedicated locator, what it is, what we are currently seeing in the industry, some of the issues we've seen, and what we're doing to overcome those situations. So what is dedicated locator to start off with? A dedicated locator is a single locate resource that is used to mark all underground infrastructure within a project area. This has an exclusion of transmission hydro, transmission pipeline, MTO, and other underground infrastructure not registered through Ontario One Call. Now, with the current standard locate process that's currently happening right now, you submit a locate request through Ontario One Call, and each underground infrastructure owners are affected would be notified by Ontario One Call. Now, depending on the area, a locate alliance consortium LSP may have 2 or 3 of those utilities to locate, but others will have their own individual locators coming out to complete those locate. Now, this is where we start seeing the inconsistency and the constant struggle that we're trying to, accomplish in the industry itself, of having a full, a valid, complete locate package on hand for that, for that project to start work, continuous work, or schedule work, continuously itself. The time frame of locate completion between each utility may differ, even though the validity dates have changed to 60 days. So we often still see projects calling multiple locates or relocates every 2 or 3 weeks in hopes of fulfilling a complete locate package. So, as a member's perspective, a large project can come through within your area, and the demands of locates are going from hundreds of locates and relocates that's coming through. So this is why dedicated locator was introduced at this point, where now that project owner can hire on a dedicated locator on hand for their project for when they require the locates, taking out that that stress off to the member side, taking away the bogness that's occurring right now to the public stream. So just going through those benefits itself again, there's, this is a good solution for 3 that we have listed here. With long-term projects, obviously with the long-term projects, it's lasting from several months and even years in duration. With continuous long-term work, there will be constant locates, relocates to manage timelines between individual utility locates, where we often see fallout of alignment, and take large amount of resources from both the excavator and the members to manage and keep up with the project needs. With large-scale projects, a large amount of locates, once again, a large amount of locates and relocates that are required to cover the project scopes, putting a lot of pressures on both ends, bogging down the system again on the public load. So the overall locate requests were at this point, where if you have a dedicated locator on hand, that project does not have to rely on the member's resource. It doesn't have to rely on someone else's resource for to have a complete locate. That project owner will have a dedicated locator on hand there to complete the locate as to when it's needed. And last, obviously, there's the project complicity. There's some projects that are, would have complicated requirements. These projects nowadays, they're not going in the standard linear process where they're jumping from point A to point C to point E to point F and going back to point B. So it's happening all over the area itself. So having a dedicated locator on hand there, once again, it takes away the demand and stress that's coming through the public load, the public members' resources, and leaving that up to the dedicated locator to manage the requirements of the project itself. So in this case too, in terms of with dedicated locator, we can look at the delivery of the locates, but we also have to look at it in the safety aspect of things. Let's think about safety and dig safe practice for a moment here. In the current public system, how many times do we have project owners requesting to a member for a paint refresh or help in clarification of discrepancy of locates on site? Public locators are required to answer to emergencies and attend to other locates. Therefore, there are times that there are scenarios where projects proceed with the excavation, even though they may not have clear paints on the ground or may have discrepancy, but due to their scheduling, they still proceed with the excavation, and meaning to say, damage is going to occur through this way. Now, with a dedicated locator on hand, your infrastructure is safe at hand as well too, with that dedicated locator, where this project owner has that flexibility to call upon the dedicated locator to come on site, refresh the paint without submitting additional relocates that will go into this public loader system, and help clarify discrepancy to when and where it's required when the crews are waiting on site. So you got to look at it from the member's perspective. All these, they're not relying on your resources at this point, right? They have the dedicated locator on hand, where that resource is through their own resource that to come up on site there for you. So with this one, we just want to expand again to what we've discussed on the previous slide of the benefits of dedicated locator. I mentioned on the previous slide, but ultimately one thing that the excavation committee has been after for a number of years now is control over the locating side of things, right? With dedicated locator in place, as a project owner, they can now manage that and have full control. it means that they can control when and where they require the dedicated locator to come and complete those locates. And in retrospect, as an underground infrastructure owner, you're not having to send your own resources once again to complete those locates multiple times, trying to meet the demand of the project, relieving some of the strain off your public load. With the control, you are able to manage, they're able to manage their dedicated locator to work ahead from their crew, not having to wait for a locator for paint refresh, the travel time as they're readily available within, the project area. This helps the project to be on time and have that flexibility itself. With that flexibility and keeping with full control, it obviously reduce and remove downtime and costs for the project itself. And also as a member, it's reducing your costs because you're not sending out your own locating resource to go out there and meet the demand of the project itself. So now with this slide here, we just want to kind of go through the numbers that we are seeing since the inception of Bill 93, the ascent of Bill 93 in April of last year. As you can see here in the dark green line, we started off in May. Prior to Bill 93, there was a version of dedicated locator, but it was very manual. There was no one was compelled to take part in the agreement. So there were a lot of these setups where other members would voluntarily take part of and others would not. So you can see where that timeline again didn't necessarily match up. With the new legal concept of dedicated locator, we've seen that clarify a little bit, and certainly the numbers of telecom industries are the ones that's really taking advantage of this today. As we move towards the end of the year, we saw a slight dip in numbers, which is common, seasonal dip that we see yearly. But what I want to emphasize is that dip is a lot less shallow than a public stream. This tells us that the project of dedicated locator model are continuing year-round long. From the public system side of things, we see a larger dip out of that. With project owners utilizing dedicated locator, they're working year-round at this point. They have their locator on hand there, so the work continues on. Now you can see the numbers here in orange. For 2023, we're looking at January, February, and March. We recorded more dedicated locator requests than any other months of last year. Bear in mind, this is obviously not a peak month for your typical excavation activities, but we can see that these project owners are preparing and getting ahead to start up for the peak season. So by the numbers again here, we accumulated data here from May 2022 to current date of March 2023. What you're looking at here are the top 10 active DL project owners that's registered across Ontario right now. Topping off the list here, we're looking at telecom companies. Bell Canada, Rogers, and Enbridge are topping off the list here with dedicated locator that they're utilizing the program itself all across their fiber to home install. Enbridge with their gas installs or maintenance that they require. But if we look at down the list, these are the common project owners that are heavily use of dedicated locator within your areas here. Now, speaking with municipalities as members here, these numbers itself, it shows the top 10 DL active regions that we are seeing across Ontario. Topping the list here, we're looking at York region, Durham region, and Peel regions are the top 3 highest usage of dedicated locator. Once again, these numbers are going hand in hand with obviously the fiber to home projects and project owners. Everyone wants to, beat the race in terms of, installing their fiber to home infrastructures all across Ontario. So in this one here, we just want to kind of bring out the information in terms of dedicated locate requirements between all stakeholders or all the parties involved under the dedicated locate model here. We can start off with the project owners. So project owners are like such Bell Canada, Rogers who are holding and hosting the actual project itself. So their responsibilities here and the requirements to submit the 90-day notice form to Ontario One Call. Now that form is available onto our webpage. Contract and approve dedicated locate service provider and notify Ontario One Call when the project is complete. Now, under Ontario One Call, once that submission is provided by the project owner, the Ontario One Call, our team here identifies some members that are within the vicinity of the work described. notify the affected members of the proposed dedicated locator project. And we are the liaison between the project owner members and the DLSP. We're here to service all stakeholders to ensure that this program is up and running, and we can ensure that everyone is in line with the requirements, the process that's required at that point. Now, as members here, your requirements here is to comply with the ONUS Act, agree upon the selected DLSP, and provide infrastructure records mapping within the 10 business days. Ensure mapping is up to date. Obviously, that's one thing that we got to ensure. You got to look at it that you're providing your mapping to a third-party service provider to safely locate your infrastructure. So that's something that we, as a members, could get ahead and ensure that their mapping is up to date. Updates are possible into that, and providing access to that to a third-party service provider. In this case, dedicated locate service provider. Now, with the last one here, we're looking at the dedicated locate service provider. In short form, we call them DLSP. They reach out to members identified within the project limit to obtain mapping. And then from there, once they retain that, their responsibility is obviously to complete the locate within the 10 business days or as per when instructed of the time frame of the project owner and the proponent. So on this side, we just want to provide a bit of an update to what we're currently seeing right now out there. With the current projects that we're seeing, currently what's happening on the left-hand side here and under the currently what's happening are all the projects that have we seen that are under dedicated locator models already. So we see the likes of Electra, Amico, that's doing water main rehab. Obviously, we have the Bell legacy projects. The legacy projects, what we call them, is previous models of dedicated locator that we are now slowly transitioning into the new model and new projects coming through. We have several municipalities or cities that are actually taking advantage of dedicated locator model as well too, to efficiently work with their capital projects within their municipalities for any of their work. And obviously down the list here, we see more of the fiber to home or Enbridge coming through at that point. Imminent, we are looking at Zayo. They're coming close to coming through into dedicated locator, and then we have upcoming our conversation that we're having with possible project owners that are just providing, completing their full submission and just kind of going through the talks with them of properly submitting a proper dedicated locate request going through. Now in this one here, what we're coming across is that we have two separate different type of projects that we accept under dedicated locate projects. The two type of projects that we're looking at is one is it's the regular DL project. The regular DL project is a dig project on a single defined work area that does not extend outside of a prescribed limit. What does that mean? Is, for example, transit projects, a road rehab dig project on a singular continuous stretch of road. So it doesn't extend outside of that singular road or stretch of road where this work is happening and whatnot. So it's a concentrated spot of area where this single project is occurring. Now we have a DL regional project request where we introduce with the actual inception of the dedicated locator. This helps out to ensure that we have like multiple dig projects within multiple work areas that extends throughout the prescribed region. So with this model itself, we see a lot of the fiber to home installs and municipal, like I said again, the municipal capital dig projects expanding across multiple regions that are taking advantage of this model itself because it gives them the flexibility and capabilities to work and use the system of dedicated locator throughout, their region and capital works or the installs where work is not on a concentrated stretch of road. It is in multiple pockets of area within the region itself. So with that in hand, this is an introductory session once again for our dedicated locate here. We want to open up the floor here in terms of conversation. Let's just have the open conversation if you have any concerns or share experience. But with this one here, I just want to leave it up in the information here if you guys want to write it down. This is our team. Myself, Marco Dator, is the supervisor of the dedicated locator. We have our coordinator on the calls as well too. We have Alex, Brandon, and Christine. Our email information is there. Take that down. We are here to service you. We are here to answer all your calls. We are willing to jump on to information calls with you guys just to ensure that we are going through this process all together as as a whole to ensure that dedicated locator will be into a success. So at this time of point, I'm gonna unmute all, once again, if you have any question, proceed to go ahead. If you don't have, if someone else is speaking at this point, just ensure that you hit yourself into back to mute. Okay, so I have given, I believe, the access to everyone here to unmute themselves. So if you have any questions, feel free to go ahead. The floor is open now.
Hi, Marco. Shane Behrens from City of Brampton. I have a question. What recourse do infrastructure owners have if a plant is hit in a DL project because of a mislocate?
So it still goes in a standard process of investigation, right? If, whether or not a project is on a regular process or dedicated locator, in terms of damage investigation still goes the same way. So the recourse of obviously to start off investigations to figure out what is the root cause of that damage, whether or not, it is a mapping issue, or whether or not it is a poor locating issue, or whether or not it's an excavator issue where they did not follow the locate itself. So the recourse itself is that, obviously you got to look at it both ways. One way is as a member, you can put that through your agreement with the DLSP in terms of any escalation of discrepancy between mapping. You have to indicate that into your agreement with the DLSP of if there's discrepancy in mapping, this is a certain process that they would have to follow. Obviously, in terms of recourse of mislocate, then there is a recourse, and that's the reason why it's recommended that there is an agreement between the member and the DLSP for those purposes itself. So it still goes to answer your question, it still goes through the regular standard process of investigation for the root cause of the damage, and then from that point, and once the root cause is determined, whether or not it is mislocated, that is part of the agreement that is put together between the member and the DLSP to how that would look like in terms of liability wise. And then if it's obviously the excavator side of things, there's the excavator or the project owner in this case that will be responsible for those purposes. Did I answer your question on that one, Brittany? Okay, I believe we have some questions on our chat here. We're just kind of going through it. My apologies for our little bit of a system here. Just bear with me here.
So Marco, one common one we've seen from some members is, as a member, how do I confirm if I am affected on a regional request? So I'm a member, I got a regional request. How do I know if I am actually affected?
Okay, so with that, it's a good question that we get around through all members that we send out to. So when we determine a work area or a project owner submits a request through us to a project scope of area, so it could be regional itself, we send a notice. So we provide a member list who are affected within that project scope. Now, this could be through the neighboring municipalities as well, through a neighboring region, as obviously the mapping can touch in within the limits of the area of their working. So that's something the member can determine based on the information provided on the submission of the request, the regional request. So the project owner can provide a mapping, or if it's a region, and let's say if you're a neighboring boundaries of that, then that's something that you can connect with the project owner and dedicated located service provider to get further information to how their work scope expand. And then from there, if you're not, obviously if your infrastructure is not affected, you can advise that to the project owner and then exclude yourself from that model itself or that request itself if, as long as you are confirming that you are not affected directly.
And we've got another good one from the question tab here. Thank you. How is unlocatable infrastructure handled in the dedicated located model?
Once again, this is going back, and I'm going to put this back to the member with the conversation that they'll have with the DLSP. It is going to go to a recommendation of the agreement. So the agreement that we are asking for, or we are recommending for the members to work with the DLSP, these are the type of things you would include to that as escalation process. For to say, like, if an infrastructure is untenable, then there should be an escalation process that the DLSP can follow at that point to escalate the situation to the member, and perhaps the member can provide a resource locator to come out there, or how to ever to resolve that infrastructure itself. So this is something that you can take that recourse through your agreement with the DLSP, ensuring that that is all laid out in there in terms of escalation process, who to contact if, sort of say, that the dedicated locator come across these type of issues.
We've got another one here, which is a good question. What happens if the member or utility owner lacks accessible records or mapping to locate their infrastructure?
So with that, it's if they, obviously we're promoting to improve mapping for all members itself, right? One thing we can look at is obviously we can put that into agreement as well with the DLSP and work out with the DLSP where you can provide a resource during this time to the DLSP to come out with the DLSP to locate the infrastructure, put that onto a drawing or mapping that's required for the locate, and keep that in terms of, as an improvement to your record. But this is something that the DLSP would have to reach over and kind of have that agreement with the member to ensure that, if you're not able to provide mapping, then you have to send out a resource to work with the DLSP to ensure that this is, they're able to locate your infrastructure clearly, safely, and properly, and then we'll use that in terms of record. In some cases, you have a dedicated the project owner is supplying a dedicated locator out there already in terms of locating your infrastructure. In hand, what are we doing with those paperwork, or what are we doing with those infrastructure that they have located? If it's no, if you're going through this process already, you can turn that around with the DLSP and request or even work out with them to improve your mapping. So they're out there already locating with you, locating your infrastructure. You are working out there with them. Use that information to turn back to improve your mapping. So that's one way you can look at it in this type of process, having an additional resource out there now locating your infrastructure. Therefore, use that information that they've used to locate your infrastructure and build that into a mapping.
Another one from the chat here. So when are excavators required to use a dedicated locator?
So it's more so of the project owner. So the excavators itself, we are not mandating the use of dedicated locator. It is something that is beneficial for all large excavators out there in terms of, obviously the ticket loads coming through and having your locates on time. So there's really no specific mandate to that directly, or no specific when they are required to go dedicated locator. It is something that they can work with the project owner if it's beneficial for that point in, and we can have those conversations to get going with dedicated locator model. So what we're doing here is we're just promoting how dedicated locator can work and benefit the project itself, whether or not the excavator would want to take that on as a project owner for their work that they are doing for, or the project owner can supply that through.
Marco, can you hear me?
Yes, we could.
Okay, sorry, Nelson from Leamington Water. Just a question with regards to what you just highlighted. Infrastructure that is pretty much, we'll say, when we came in, we inherited or amalgamated in 1999 with Mercia Township. There is a ton of aged infrastructure that is, we have a multitude. We have cement asbestos, we have steel size PVC with no tracer wire. We have information that we can't obtain through some of the records. The records don't indicate what was there. These are things put in back in the 40s and 50s. And we do our best to try and locate. Cement asbestos obviously is another one that you can't locate. There's no traceable detection on it. So We're doing our best. What we're doing is we still do all the locates in-house. As they come through, I send the required team needed, whether I got four groups out there doing locates at the same time. We're doing our best to get to it. But with regards to that locate, when we can't, we put down, you know, that it's can't detect water main, or we recommend maybe hydrovacing or whatever it may be. We do our best and use all resources available to try and mark that out. But what happens in an instant like that where we can't, and we say that it's undetectable or no information, please dig with caution, or recommend that they hydrovac? How does that play out to the contractor himself receiving that locate saying that we can't do it?
It goes the same way for dedicated locator and the regular standard process. If you're doing this in your regular standard process, dedicated locator won't be able to do more than what you can as well too as a member locating your infrastructure at that point, right? If you're suggesting that it's, you know, it's untonable, it can't be located at this point, and you know, obviously hydrovacs are required, then in terms of that, you know, it just goes through the regular process of how you would recommend to proceed within that area itself. But in terms of that, once that is provided, or let's say once that project is able to expose that infrastructure, then, you know, as a member itself, and that's something you can work with the project owner or the DLSP at that point, that, you know, put this on record, put this in you know, put this into a form of mapping to ensure that you're not going to come across this again in the future itself. But in terms of having in the public's in the regular process versus dedicated locator, to what you can't locate, it's untonable, that's understandable. And if you're proceeding with it that they have to hydrovac, that's the same process that the dedicated locator will be going through at this point.
So the dedicated locator is somebody through you we're involved with, or is it through our own forces and just having somebody stationed with that crew, you know, to stay ahead of them? Or how
so
do you...
the dedicated locator is a locating service provider. Okay, so it's a locating service provider that is a resource that is hired upon directly by the project owner.
Okay.
So a locate service provider could be, you know, the existing locate service provider that are currently out there right now. Some may be in-house, where they would have to obtain the training, obviously, from each individual members to locate their infrastructure. But that locator is in-house directly for that project owner. There's only servicing that project owner. So they're not going outside of any other locate request. They're only responding to that locate request for that project owner.
So then that is hired through the actual contractor himself, or does that have to be...
No, it's hired through the project owner itself. So the project owner would have to, you know, obviously hire on a dedicated locate service provider first for their project, and then that is then notified to the members, and then from there, the members can agree upon that at this point and work with their dedicated locate service provider.
Okay, so then in theory, the way we currently practice it municipally here, then I really have no part with the dedicated locator, because we're still doing our own, and I being able to send out, we're still meeting the dates. I mean, obviously there's things I have to push back on my side to be able to deal with the, I think we've got 6 contractors in the area, or 7 contractors in the area, all over the municipality doing the work. And we're trying to still meet the 5 to 10 day as they come in. But the problem we're faced is let's say the owner of the infrastructure that the contractor is doing the work for then changes route. So you called me, you said you were starting at point A and heading towards point B, and then a week later, we've already started heading that way. You call me and say, well, listen, changing plans, we're going from point B to point A. And then we turn around and say, well, listen, we've started at this point. That's all been marked out as per request. Now you want us to start at this point. We're going to be a few days. I mean, obviously, and that's the conflict that we're having with some of the guys around here. They keep changing their start points.
And that's where you got to look at is dedicated locator will take you out of that, you know, that strain of the change and the complexity of a project, right? Under a dedicated locator, that takes it away from you completely. So a dedicated locator can come in there, obtain your mapping and records, or even training that you're required to locate the infrastructure, understandable that there's some infrastructure that requires your resources to come out there to work hand in hand with the dedicated locate service provider. But
Right.
essentially, that scenario you're looking at, you're hoping in that case that you have records, proper records for the the dedicated locator to able to locate that for you. So that way, in those cases, when obviously the schedule change or direction change in terms of construction, you're not worrying about that anymore. You're only worrying about the public load that's coming through your site. That project owner has their own resource to complete those locates on your behalf. Now, if, like I said, if it comes down to having certain areas that are a bit sensitive or untonable, then that's something that the dedicated locator service provider would work hand in hand with you to how to locate that infrastructure. That's the only time that may come across where a resource is required from your end.
Yep.
But like I said, at the end of the day, that's put through the agreement to how you can how this escalation process can work out on your side.
Okay, so from all points of access here, this would be something initiated by the contractor if he feels that we can't keep up or he wanted something specific. He would then contact you to get into this dedicated locator program through him. And if you guys needed to find, you would then work with us to be able to give you information to be able to do so. Because currently right now, everything is coming through the standard one call transmission, and that's how we were dealing with all.
Exactly. So
Okay.
any of the dedicated locator models that are registered under us, we would send out a notification through us first. So you would receive a member notification email or acknowledgement email to the dedicated locator team,
Okay.
indicating that this project is coming on board within your location. This is the project owner. These are the registered approved excavators or proponents. This is their dedicated locate service provider. And then from that point, and when you receive that notice from us, you can reach out directly to the dedicated locate service provider or the project owner, or vice versa. They'll reach over to you to say, we're coming into your area now. What do we require to locate your infrastructure at this point? What are your mappings? What are your training that you require us to go into? All that timeline can work through before the project actually commence. Now, there's some cases, there's some projects that are just, are existing. So, for example, if the existing contractors that are within your area decides to go to dedicated locator, then there's that transition that we're just transitioning them over to the model itself. So there's that timeline where it can still be part of the public side until we get them set up properly on the dedicated locator side.
Okay, so like I say, at this point, I haven't received any of those notifications or anyone's reached out to do anything on our side.
Yeah.
So I can just keep status quo on what we're doing right now until such time.
That's correct. Yeah, that's correct. But what we are trying to promote here at this point is that eventually down the road, there's something that's going to come up to your side of things to better prepare, yourself and your infrastructure itself, is ensure that you have proper mapping and how you can able to look at and share that with a third party, and what it would look like to, how would you go into agreement with this dedicated locate service provider? What would you want them to ensure? You want to put that in paper of escalation process and whatnot. Those are the things that you want to start looking into, because once again, once a project comes through on your side of things, you have the 10 business days to comply with, to agree with the dedicated locate service provider, and then from that point on, you can work with them hand in hand in terms of how do you provide them their mapping, what are your standards, what are your trainings, and how is that going to look like. So this is something you can forecast out. Yes, you can meet the status quo, but a lot of municipalities are working around building up this template agreement where they can work with. So when it comes in, they don't have to go to the standard process and whatnot. They have it all set up ready. A dedicated lawyer can come in and just say, okay, here's our standard agreement. If you meet with this, these are our mapping. We can proceed with that.
Yeah. So I mean, currently we have just round numbers. We'll say 10,000 services. I've got service drawings for every single service. We've mapped things out. We've been able to create drawings. Some of the stuff we don't have information for, when we do recommend, we're on site. They do hydrovac, and then we will tie the water main measurement in. Once we find it, come across it. We use every resource available. We even gone as far as what we're calling witching the water main. Some can do, some can't, but it's not something you're going to define as a guaranteed mark. You know what I'm saying? We can use that when we're in the process of locating. But really at this point, like I said, we've been doing it. We've always done it. And right now we're following on the standard, which is 5 days to locate. Some of these you guys have to be realistic. If they're locating or they're asking, like we've had one that encompasses 52 locates, which spans kilometers.
Yeah.
Obviously, we can't meet it in 5 days. We are ahead of, we
Yeah.
know, we actually ask them, like, where is your start point? And we'll stay
Yes.
ahead of them right when they come in, because we're doing this daily. We have a dedicated crew that's out there daily, and then we add crews as needed when they start moving around. So it's
Yeah.
imperative that they let us know where they plan on starting. When they change things, then we adapt to where they're at, and then refocus, reshift the focus, and start coming from the other end. But we've been very successful over my tenure here anyway so far, to be able to continue to do this without issue, and we're doing it on a 5-day turnaround versus the 10. So at this point in time, I'm going to say that if it's something that is then requested by the contractor in way of they wanted somebody specific to them to do this for them, we have no problem working with the dedicated locating service to be able to determine what it is that they can do or would need to do to work on infrastructure. I just wanted clarity, and that helps me out.
No, that's great. This is what this is for. Provide clarity and just share that knowledge throughout everyone here in the municipality and as a membership. Like I said, in hopes of the excavators working into your township there, if they do get into the dedicated locator model, or if you can even advise them to that there's possibly something that they can look into, we're more than willing to give them that, the presentation of how this could benefit their project. And that takes it away a lot of the stress of coming into your side of things in terms of having to meet all their expectation itself. So dedicated locator model will definitely work that out for you.
That's great. I appreciate that, because that will be one thing. If somebody does asking, I can direct them to the program and have them go through the program to be able to do something. And like I said, we'd have no problem working with the dedicated locator service to be able to determine what they need anyway. So that's good. I appreciate the information.
Not a problem.
Well, Kirsten Rule here from the city of Hamilton.
Sorry.
Oh, sorry. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you, Chris. Kristen, you said?
Kirsten, yeah. Sorry,
Kristen,
I apologize if this repeats something. I had to step away from my desk, so I missed the last 10 minutes. But
No
when you guys get the DL projects, are they going to all members? Like I'm in Hamilton, we're seeing DL projects, but we're not receiving DL requests.
So in this case, there's, like I said, on the previous model that we had, or the previous model that was prior to Bill 93, there was already a voluntary basis of project that are under dedicated locator model. We are working with larger entities like those, such as Bell, that are using those programs that at that time, when they set that up, it was voluntary basis, so not all members were included to that. We're now doing a migration to the new model, so therefore, with the new model, obviously all members are to comply to the dedicated locator model. So we are sending out those notices now. So if you see something that comes across on your end, in terms of locates wise, we can look at who those project owners is and kind of see if they are a registered project. And this is perhaps something that was missed from the start off when the program was first started, where they didn't approach, it wasn't approached to your municipality to go into a dedicated locator. But in this case, now we can migrate or switch them over at this point. There's also some cases where you may see some projects that are within the neighboring area. So sometimes those numbers can factor in a little bit to your region, but although it's still working on that other region, not specifically to Hamilton itself. So there could be some neighboring work that sort of say that, but does not affect your infrastructure at that point.
Right. Yeah. Like sometimes I'll even see when I'm in 360 feedback, I'll see in the excavating company name, it'll show that it's a DL that's requesting the ticket, but we will be getting it through our regular 360 feedback channel, and we're not getting it as a DL request. So is that something I can expect to continue to see, or is that going to be changing?
It's eventually, we are working throughout the industry itself and all the existing users of the previous model of dedicated locator to migrate them over to the new model. Under the new legislation or act, there is no room for we call it the legacy dedicated locator model. So in this case, we are migrating them or moving them forward to the new model, where the existing one will no longer be available for them. So yes, we're working all across the board. Obviously, it's timelines, working on resources, working with the members to kind of ensure this transition very well. But if you have any examples on your side of things, send feel free to send that over to our team, to our email address here. We can definitely look and investigate who these project owners are going through, and we can create those conversation and open up those conversation with yourself and that project owner, and perhaps get into the dedicated locator model at that point.
Sure, I'll send you some tickets. I do have a couple other questions. I'll try and make them quick. So
Sure.
for negotiating with the DLs when we get to that point,
Mm-hmm.
what happens if the DL doesn't accept the terms of our agreement? Like if we have certain criteria, maybe their staff need to meet, and the DL says they're not able to do that, what happens next?
So this is something where the project owner and ourselves, as Ontario One Call, steps in place. We become the liaison based on that situation. We'll look at the requirements that you're providing. We'll look at the root cause of why it's a decline from the dedicated local service provider. So we kind of work hand in hand between the parties and kind of meet halfway and mediate that situation to a part where we can all come into an agreement. So that's what our team is here for. This is what dedicated locator for Ontario One Call stands, that we step in as part of our work scope here, is that we work with all stakeholders, from the project owner side of things, from the dedicated local service provider things, to a member side of things. There's some cases that we've come across with where we were just able to mediate in between, and it could be the most simplest thing that that both parties did not agree or meet eye to eye, but when we all sat down in one conversation and kind of iron out the parts that are in a disagreement, we all come into a proper resolution to that, and we come into an agreement based on that. So this is one thing that we want to say is it's not black and white for dedicated locator. Where a project owner or DSP can come in there. They don't just come in and just ask for your mapping, go into an agreement and whatnot. There's things in between where we all work as an industry to ensure that everyone's meeting this criteria properly and everyone can safely locate the infrastructure itself. So it's definitely something that we can all work on together.
The specific instance I'm expecting to deal with is like we historically have required our LSPs to follow OPSS Municipal 106, which requires employees working on live electrical infrastructure, which would include location, to be licensed electricians. Mm-hmm. And my understanding is that's something that not a lot of the existing DLs can support. So is that something like One Call could assist us in negotiating with a DL?
Yeah, it's definitely something we can look into. We would have to take this offline. I specifically don't have answers directly to that, how that would look like. But reach over to us. We have our email there. Reach over to us. We can go jump into a call what this requirement looks like and how we can kind of work around to it with future DLSP that's coming on to yours, onboarding to your side.
Good, I'll reach out to you.
Great. I believe
this is Brianne from Chatham-Kent, the municipality.
Hi.
So we have our own in-house locators, and our kind of issue, again, our mapping, we amalgamated in '98, and we have a lot of missing records in certain areas. But one of our things our locators mainly do, they use our online mapping as just a reference. Which has like a code in it that represents the as-built drawings that we have on a server. So if we get a dedicated locator request, are we going to have to provide all the as-builts for that project area, let's say?
That's correct. So you got to look at it this way, is that you need to provide that third-party locating service provider the same access where they can safely locate your infrastructure. So whatever that access would require for them to open up that mapping, that is access that you may want to look into providing them. Obviously, if there's certain agreements set in place in that, or MDA set up in place with that, that's something you can discuss with the dedicated local service provider to sign that up before you provide them access to that. But basically, you got to look at it this way, is that whatever is required on your end, in-house wise, to locate that infrastructure, you should be able to provide that to a third-party locating service provider. And how that would look like, that's something you would have to work out with that locate service provider.
Okay, and this would just be like on a project base, like we wouldn't need to provide them all of Chatham-Kent's as-built.
Yeah, that's correct.
And so then once the project is done, they would no longer be allowed to reference the as-builts that we sent them?
Exactly. So what it is that what we do is with these projects, obviously they could be regional or project scale based. So that's something we would notify you what type of projects coming through across. So how the mapping would look like in terms of how you're going to share that, whether it's or not it's a full scale scope of the regional or is it just a concentrated base single project in a singular role. But in terms of the project itself, they do provide a touch point to how long their project or estimated end date. And we also do a touch point on our end. Sorry about that. On our end, that when the project is finished, they would have to notify Ontario One Call. Therefore, once that's completed, then we shut off all access, and we also notify the members itself that the project has commenced at this point. So whether or not what those access are on your end, you can remove those access at that point.
And then just another quick question. My team, pretty much every day we are editing or adding things to our online mapping.
Mhm.
So let's say we have this dedicated locator team for a month. Every time we update our system, if it's in their area, would we just send them that additional information? Like it could be something as simple as we got GPS points for water turnoffs.
Yeah.
Or water valves. Would we update them on that, or would we kind of just let them go by the as-built drawings?
No, any updates will be very beneficial for the dedicated locator service provider. So you got to look at it as well this way, is that those updates are providing your locators, to safely locate the infrastructure in the future, or another occurrence. You got to look at it the same way for a dedicated locator service provider. Their project scope is within those areas. So if there's some improvements of mapping in there, you would want to share that with them.
Okay, and would it be, I guess, acceptable if we just say every Friday night before we leave work, we update them versus updating them every single day?
Yeah,
Or is it as soon as we update, we need to get them that information?
No, well, obviously, if there's an update real time and they are working within that area, then an update at that point it's a lot better to be provided right at that moment or right within that day. But if there's no further updates, a weekly touch point is always great. What we're seeing right now is that a lot of these dedicated local service provider do weekly touch points between ourselves or even some members, depending on how intensive the areas or work scopes are. So that's something you can work into your agreement or have that discussion with the project owner or the DLSP how you want that to work out with. So it's like I said again, it's not black and white. That's something you can have those discussions with the dedicated.
Perfect. Yeah, just because our mapping team is myself and one other tech, so we're already treading water, let's say, in most cases. So
yeah,
that's good to know. Thank you so much.
No problem.
Hi, everyone. I just want to kind of put it out there. So just to be fully transparent, dig site, project scope, everything that we're kind of talking about here, I just want everyone to know that Ontario One Call is allowing Enbridge to use this dedicated locator for maintenance work. So I want people to understand that too, that it's not just like when I understood this to begin with, I thought it was just a project, but it also can be any dig site, which could actually be maintenance. So just so everyone is aware of that, so they can get their information ready for when they pass it along. So the records, that part of it, it can be very intense for other municipalities.
Okay, thank you, Heather, for that. Obviously, it still goes through the same standard process for these for these projects. They are still submitting locate requests. In the municipality side of things, they are still submitting permits. Obviously, for maintenance, I'm not sure how that works. I can't really speak on behalf of how Enbridge works in terms of maintenance work, but any other work itself, so work scope itself, still goes through the standard process of them obtaining permits through the municipality side of things. But also, I just want to keep in mind here, and this is where we'll go into more in-depth session on our second session on May 10th, is that through the web portal, we are able to provide information access for members. So this is a reverse lookup in a way for a member to look up what projects or what locates are being submitted through, obviously your municipality, in this case, your station code, and you can see what are dedicated locator. So you can see visibility based on that, what are the locates are being called for that project owner within your area there. So that's something we can share with you on our next session here. We are building that documentation formalized as well too, so that's something we can provide in our member section in our webpage under dedicated locator for how this instruction could work through and use our web portal to do that reverse lookup. Okay, any other questions? We have about 6 minutes into our session here. So any last questions? If not, we can end this session early. For those who haven't signed up or have signed up for our second session there, where we will be sending out a new link to our second session for the May 10th session. We are in transition over to a new webinar platform, so we will be using Teams on the next session. So the existing link that you guys were provided initially will be changing, so a communication will be sent out to all invitees at this point, or whoever registered on the second session, that a new link will be provided then. Okay, so I would like to thank everyone for their time this afternoon. Once again, what you see in front of you is our contact information here. Please feel free to reach over to us here. We're willing to jump on to separate calls with you guys as members, specifically to go through the process or just to go through any of your questions that you have in there at that point. So feel free to reach over to our team, go forward there, and then we'll see you on our May 10th session where we'll go more in depth with the process itself.